Tiki Barber decided to comment on Washington Commanders running back Austin Ekeler, and it's clear that Tiki has suffered a little bit of memory loss. So we're going to remind him of what the past actually looked like coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated, and I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through for today's episode. Everydayers, welcome back, and I appreciate you for coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode. On today's episode, we are going to continue our series of breakdowns, going through each position group, kind of gauging the state of each position group on the Commanders rosters. Today, we're going to look at the tight ends. But first, we got to talk about Tiki Barber, who lost his stinking mind recently. We're going to help him find it coming up here in just a minute. If you want to discuss that or anything else we're going to talk about here on the show or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is text me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today. Become an insider. From there, you can send me messages, questions, your takes, analysis, whatever you want. You're also going to get plenty of extra content, analysis, opinions, news, live texting from games, practices, press conferences, the whole 9 yards, all delivered straight to your phone. No hashtags, no apps, no filters needed. Again, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to get in on that today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I want to keep our evaluation series first and foremost, but I have to do this one topic first today, guys. Sorry. I hope you can bear with me here, but it needed to be talked about. You remember the BetterHelp ads we've had recently? We were talking about getting something off your chest. This is just one of those moments, guys. I got to get this off my chest. So hopefully you can hang in here with me while you're planning your 4th of July celebration events, whatever that's going to be. Sit at home, go somewhere, fireworks, no fireworks, food, no food. It's Independence Day. Do whatever you want. That's kind of the point, right? Within legal ramifications, of course. Tiki Barber, my understanding is he's a radio host now in New York, or he's on the radio regularly in New York. I'm not sure what capacity, mostly talking about New Jersey football because that's what New York likes to do. He decided recently that he was going to speak on Austin Ekeler's control over his own NFL career, saying, quote, Austin Ekeler said something the other day that was so discouraging. It had nothing to do with anything. It was discouraging because he was asked about why the Jim Harbaugh-led Chargers weren't ideal for him, or why did they move on from him? And you know what his answer was? They want a guy who can run the ball 300 times a season. They want someone who can run the ball 300 times. End quote. That's what Tiki Barber commented on. We talked about it here on the show. Austin Ekeler went on the Rich Eisen show. He's said this before. He's made no qualms about it, that Harbaugh and the Chargers were looking for a back that they could potentially hand the ball off to 300 times. He said, look, that's not me. It's not my game. It's never been my game. I'm at my best when I can be part of a two-man team, a duo, someone can relieve me, whatever, however you put it. Basically, Austin knows that he is at his best when he's part of a unit, not being looked at as the only guy, the single point of failure for an NFL team's running game. His sidekick, Tiki Barber, sidekick on the show, chimed in, basically said that Ekeler was saying he couldn't carry the ball 300 times in the season. Great deducing by the co-host there, because that's exactly what Austin Ekeler said. Barber then continued, quote, well, he's just saying it's not my game. It's not my game to be. Dude, you couldn't get me off the field. End quote. That's what Tiki Barber said. Quote, you couldn't get me off the field. Remember that. It's important. End quote. He then tries to compare Austin Ekeler to the likes of Christian McCaffrey, which, look, nobody's doing that. Christian McCaffrey, CMC, is a unicorn. We all know this. Derrick Henry is a unicorn. We all know this. Not everybody can be CMC. Not everybody can be Derrick Henry. Then he talks about Ekeler not wanting to be like CMC. That's why he's not being paid like CMC. And the sidekick again chimes in again and says, just talking about, well, if Austin Ekeler wants all the money that he wants, do you want to be a bell cow or not? Well, bro, clearly Ekeler does not want to be the bell cow. Barber finishes by drilling all over himself about the mentality changes in today's game. Players getting maintenance weeks. Barber is complaining about players getting maintenance weeks and how he gets criticized. Barber himself gets criticized for calling the game soft today. And that's just kind of the gist of it. If you want to hear the entire ranting of idiocy for yourself, you can find it on Twitter. I found it via Awful Announcing, which is exactly what this clip was. So it's a fitting video for that Twitter account. So let's kill the Sidekick's comments here first, okay? Sidekick talks about everything that Austin Ekeler wanted, all the money that he wants all this money. Do you want to be a bell cow or not? Austin Ekeler agreed to a deal with the Washington Commanders on the very first day of open negotiating. Very first day of open negotiating, he agreed to a deal that made him the 18th highest paid running back in the league in annual average value. On the first day, he agreed to this. That is not the sign of a man who is demanding McCaffrey-esque money or top 15, top 10, top 5 money. That's actually the sign of a man who says, I know that I'm going to contribute to you as part of a duo, so I'm going to take money commensurate to being part of a duo, which is about 18th ranked running back money in the league. So there's that. Sidekick also mentions Ekeler saying, do you want to be a bell cow or not? Clearly, he does not want to be a bell cow. Do you want to be a solo host or not? Because you're doing a show with Tiki Barber. Shouldn't the best radio, in your logic, shouldn't the best radio hosts on the radio in New York talking about New Jersey sports be solo? It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous comparison, a ridiculous question to even ask. Now to Tiki, because he's obviously the most important part of this. And this pains me because honestly, I've got a lot of love for Tiki Barber's brother, Rondé Barber. He's a Hall of Famer. Rondé is not Tiki. And I don't want Rondé to potentially think less of me because of what I'm about to say about his brother, for what that's worth. Not that he necessarily thinks highly of me anyway, but especially because I'm about to use Rondé's own words against Tiki here in this situation. But it's Tiki's fault, right? So remember, Tiki's talking about this game being soft. He's using Ekeler not wanting 300 carries a season as evidence of the game today being soft. And he's talking about how you couldn't get him off the field when he was playing. Tiki carried the ball 300 times in a single season, one time before Tom Coughlin took over as the head coach of the New York Giants in 2004. He was not a Pro Bowler, was not an All-Pro in a single of those seasons, even the one he had 300 yards or 300 carries or more. In 2004, starting when Tom Coughlin came in and took over the New York Giants, 2004, 2005, 2006, under Tom Coughlin, Tiki Barber carried the ball 322 times, 357 times, and 327 times in those 3 seasons. He made the Pro Bowl all 3 of those years, was a first-team All-Pro in 2005, and it was the first and only time in his career that he was ever All-Pro before retiring after the 2006 NFL season. Said he was going to retire midway through the 2006 NFL season. That's great. Just before the Giants went on to win 2 Super Bowls with quarterback Eli Manning, who Barber criticized following his own retirement. So that's great. Why did Barber retire? That's the question here. In his own words, this is a quote from Tiki Barber. Quote, Coach Coughlin is very hard-nosed, and I don't get a lot of time off. I couldn't sit down and rest myself. It was a constant grind, a physical grind on me that started to take its toll. While it didn't show up on Sundays because I had my best 3 seasons under him, and I give him a lot of credit for that, I could feel a difference. I knew it was time to start thinking about other things. End quote. Those other things, quitting. That's what Tiki Barber did. He got 3 consecutive seasons carrying the ball over 300 times, which is something he's claiming Austin Ekeler should want to do right now at the age of 29. Tiki Barber retiring at the age of 31. Tiki Barber, who he himself said, you couldn't get me off the field. Not only could they get you off the field, Tiki, you ran as far away from the field as you possibly could. Not only did you get off the field as quickly as you possibly could by retiring on the New York Giants, you didn't even do what Austin did and say, hey, I know who I am. I'm aware of what I'm looking for. I'm going to go find a team that better suits my situation. No, instead you put the blame on Coach Coughlin, who made you a 3-time Pro Bowler and an All-Pro. And if you'd actually stuck it out and been maybe not as soft as you're claiming these other players are, you would have won a Super Bowl, which is something your brother did. Ekeler's other things, finding an NFL team whose vision, work, and workload aligned with his own so he can compete and continue playing. So one quit, one found a better job. One's calling the other soft. Doesn't really seem to compute. But I'm not done. Sorry, Rondé. Just because we can't let Tiki hide behind the out of context quote here, in 2023, years after Tiki Barber retired, Rondé told Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times, quote, Tiki, was sick of Coach Tom Coughlin. He was beat up and just couldn't do it anymore. The position got him. If he had been working with John Gruden or somebody like that who knew how to use backs and not give him like 30 touches every single game, maybe he would have played longer, but he was just beat up and done. End quote. The same running back who's criticizing Austin Ekeler for not wanting the ball 300 times a season. The same running back who's telling everybody, you couldn't get me off the field. Left football. Because Coach Coughlin was mean, wouldn't let me rest, and ran me too much. Get Out of here, bro. FYI, Tiki Barber signed a 2-year contract extension with the New York Giants in 2005. After Tom Coughlin arrived to the team, after he got his first 300 plus yard season, after Tom made him a Pro Bowler for the first time in his career. So it sounds to me just like the Saquon Barkley conversation, which if you missed that, you can go find that. Barber's basically jealous that Austin Ekeler, unlike Tiki, is able to control his career, say, I know who I am, I know what I want, I know what I'm looking for, I'm going to go find it. Tiki didn't get that opportunity, didn't seize that opportunity when he had the opportunity, and couldn't control his career. Speaking of guys who are controlling their careers, Commanders tight end Zach Ertz controlling his career, rejoining Cliff Kingsbury in Washington. So we're going to flip from that ridiculousness to something a little bit more reasonable and applicable to this season. We're going to look at the bona fide top dog in the tight end room and the rest of the room on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on Game Time actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch when you're on the Game Time app. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. The Washington Nationals are in action on the 4th of July, so if you want to go see the game, Game Time is your hookup for great tickets and great prices. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Thanks for coming through like you do on a regular basis. Come back tomorrow. We will continue our episodes here on the Locked On Commanders podcast 5 days a week, even through the quote unquote dead period. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we just talked about Tiki Barber coming completely out of pocket, about Austin Ekeler. And look, I want to make one thing very clear at the end of that whole conversation. Football is an incredibly physical sport. It's an incredibly punishing sport. It's a brutal sport. These guys take a lot of physical punishment. So I will never, ever blame a player for walking away from the game because of the brutality of the game, or for doing what Austin Ekeler did and said, I am not a 300 touch guy a season. I need to be spelled. I need to be part of a duo. I need to be part of a more healthy type of situation, which is why I think it's crap that Tiki Barber went after Austin Ekeler the way that he did. Because again, you are a guy who, after getting 300 plus carries a season for just a few seasons, you said it's too much. My coach is a meanie head, and you left. So for you to come back and then say that somebody else should be putting their body on the line the way that you didn't want to, it's garbage, bro. It's just garbage. Respect that you played the game for 10 years. Respect everything that you achieved as an NFL player, but it's a garbage take. Just like your take about Saquon Barkley, it was a garbage take. So that's just the bottom line of it. All right. So enough about Tiki Barber and his garbage takes. Austin Ekeler here in Washington. If you missed the running back position group breakdown, that was yesterday's episode. Please go check that out. But we're going to talk about tight ends today. And again, we've been talking about kind of how do we break down tight ends and how we really kind of evaluate, rack, and stack these guys, right? And there's a lot of ways, just like every other position group. There's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of ways to what is it? Shave a cat, I think is what they say. I hope that's a saying, because if not, that's just a really weird thing for me to say. And my favorite way, I guess, is to evaluate them as flex tight ends, inline tight ends, hybrid tight ends, right? You got a whole lot of ways to classify tight ends. Inline is probably one of the most common, but you got split end, detached, Y tight ends, H tight ends, all this other stuff, right? We're not going to get into every single nuance of all of these things, but basically, the way you need to rack and stack these tight ends in Washington is essentially dependent on how Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, how Brian Johnson, the offensive pass game coordinator, and how Anthony Lynn, the offensive run game coordinator, in tandem, in trio, whatever it's called, plan to use the tight ends, right? And I think that's going to kind of flex. It's going to be a little bit of a versatile definition, perhaps, this season. So a flex tight end, you're looking more as he's a receiving tight end, right? He's usually a big wide receiver type. I know a lot of people looked at kind of Cam Sims and they're like, hey, maybe he could be a tight end type. You would have been a smaller tight end, bigger wide receiver, what have you, things like that. Basically, a receiving tight end. Inline tight ends, you're talking hand to the dirt, attached to the tackle, whatever side, right tackle, offensive tackle, doesn't matter. Part of the line of scrimmage. A lot of times you'd be asked to block. A lot of times you'd be asked to delay and get out for a route, chip block, what have you. do those things. Basically, a blocking tight end. Then a hybrid. Of course, the word hybrid typically means to connect two different things. So you've got a flex tight end that can receive, an inline tight end that can block really well. You want a guy that can do both. And sometimes you can put him in line. Sometimes you can spread him out. Sometimes you use him as a receiver. Sometimes you use him as a blocker. And then, of course, everybody wants to be able to use and be used in every single scenario. That's a very rare thing in the National Football League to find a tight end that could operate in a flex heavy scheme, inline heavy scheme. And that makes him basically the top hybrid of hybrids. So when you look at the flex tight end position, right? So who are the best flex tight ends in this Washington Commanders offensive room right now? Again, these are guys that if you only ask them to be receivers, who would be the best? Who would be the worst? We're looking at four tight ends. We're looking at five tight ends in this situation. We're looking at Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnett, the rookie out of Kansas State, John Bates, Cole Turner, and Armani Rogers. Those are the five tight ends that I view have a better than reasonable expectation to possibly compete for a roster spot. So you're looking at flex pure receivers. I've got Zach Ertz number one. I think right now he's the best pure receiving tight end on this roster, partially because of physical talent, but a lot has to do with his veteran experience, his knowledge of the game, and his ability to probably lead and kind of connect with a young quarterback like Jaden Daniels. I think Ben Sinnett's number two. I think he's flashed a lot of that potential. You see it a lot on his tape from Kansas State. We've seen it at the rookie minicamp, OTAs minicamp, all those things. So I've got him number two as a pure flex tight end. I think Cole Turner is going to be the next best receiver in this tight end room, followed by John Bates, who I think is a better receiver in the NFL than a lot of people expected to be when he joined the NFL, if that makes sense. So I've got him behind Cole Turner there, and then Armani Rogers I put behind all of those guys. Inline tight end. So if you're only asking a guy to block with his hand in, be hand in the dirt, attached to the line of scrimmage, next to the tackle, then who are we going to look at? I think John Bates is probably the best blocking tight end in the room. I think Ben Sinnett again, and it's hard because some of this is going to be projection because we haven't seen Ben Sinnett in pads. We haven't seen actually block a live pass rusher yet. So this is definitely going to be a grain of salt projection part of the conversation. But I do think that he's going to be a better blocker than Zach Ertz, who I put third. Again, the veteran experience there. Zach Ertz not necessarily known for his blocking ability. Armani Rogers got fourth because I do actually kind of want to put Armani Rogers ahead of Zach Ertz just because of what we saw the last time he was on the field. But Armani coming off of that Achilles injury, it's kind of hard to truly project him higher than Cole Turner. That's been his bugaboo, right? The thing about Cole Turner has been his lack of blocking ability. We'll see if that got better this year, but until then, you got to put him down there at the bottom. Then you're looking at hybrids. Who is the best combination of both? Who brings you the most receiving and also blocking ability? I think I'm going to put Ben Sinnett up top, right? And I think that the veteran ability and knowledge that Zach Ertz has is going to ultimately make him the starting tight end. I think he's going to be your tight end number one, your top dog in the room. But I do think that if you just put him in a vacuum and said, who's the best receiver and blocker combined, I think Ben Sinnett's going to be better than Zach Ertz was in that field. Again, Zach Ertz not exactly known for his blocking. John Bates, I think I put him ahead of Zach Ertz as well. But the thing is, like, it's the holistic look at it, right? Like Zach Ertz's receiving ability is by far and away ahead of John Bates. But if you need a guy who can do both every single snap, I think John Bates is ahead of him. Zach Ertz is going to be third there. Armani Rogers, even coming off the Achilles, is going to be fourth. And then Cole Turner, again, just until we see it, you can't put him any higher than that position there in the tight end room. So how does this all lead to Zach Ertz being the number one tight end? Who's going to be number 2, 3? And then ultimately, who's going to win that fourth tight end job? Because I do think that's a little bit up for grabs. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Again, thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Started off the show talking about Tiki coming out of pocket about Austin. Then we dove into the tight end room, ultimately kind of racking and stacking the types of tight ends that we have on this roster. And the question when you organize this depth chart is who's going to be the top tight end, who's going to fall in line second, third, and then ultimately who's going to take that fourth job, if there is indeed a fourth job on the active roster. I know there are a good amount of people out there watching the Commanders up close who do think there will be a fourth job available on the active roster. Whether that goes to Cole Turner or Armani Rogers is really kind of the question, because I think most people have Zach Ertz number one on the depth chart right now. And again, I think that, Cliff Kingsbury is known for kind of the pass heavy attack and all that stuff. And there's certainly going to be plenty of passing, but I do think he's going to want his tight end to kind of block a little bit. And while I don't think that part of the offense is going to push Zach Ertz off the field, as much. I mean, he's a little bit older, right? So I wouldn't be surprised you're going to see some Ben Sinnett, John Bates sets anyway, right? But not because Zach Ertz just can't block, but more so because at the end of the day, if you have Zach Ertz on the field, put him on the right, you put the extra blocker on the left if you have a 2 tight end set, a 12 personnel set, or you can roll away from or with Zach Ertz with the intent of, if I roll with my quarterback, Jaden Daniels, he pulls defenders with me, uncovers Ertz, I throw the ball, I connect with him, or I roll away from it so that he can operate away from the pass rush. I've got my extra blocker the same way. So there's a lot of scheme things you can do to help kind of hide the fact that Zach Ertz not necessarily the best blocker in the world. Number 2 tight end, I think entering training camp, John Bates is going to be the number 2 tight end. I think that his consistency across the board is just really good and really valuable to an NFL team. I think that I said this with Adam Epstein on the radio here local in the DMV recently. I think that John Bates he's the kind of tight end that any NFL team would love to have, because no, he's not your Travis Kelce, you know what I mean? He's not your superstar, your Mark Andrews or things like that, but he's a really solid dude that can do everything you ask a tight end in the NFL to do really well. Can't do any of them great, but he can do everything really well. I think that's incredibly valuable in the NFL. So John Bates, health, permitting, knock on wood, it does. I think he's gonna have a very long career in the NFL because of that. But I don't think he's ever going to just kind of become the top guy anywhere. Ben Sinnett, I think he enters training camp as the 3rd tight end. I think by the end of the preseason, Sinnett certainly could be that number 2 tight end. And I think by this time next year, Ben Sinnett's probably going to be the number 1 tight end. So it's just a matter of how quickly that climb happens, when it happens. There's really no rush at the end of the day because you do have some faith in the guys ahead of him currently. So you don't need to rush it, which is great for the player because he can just focus on getting better. Doesn't have to worry about all those other things. Because unlike some people might think, you don't have to play 300 snaps or get 300 touches a season to be a great player. Clearly. Armani Rogers, Cole Turner, I think they're battling it out for that 4th tight end spot. It's hard, guys. To be honest with you, it's quite hard because Armani Rogers, if Armani Rogers that we saw last comes back just at the same or even better than his Achilles injury, I think he's going to really battle Cole Turner for that last spot. Cole Turner certainly has a lot of upside as a receiver. I think he's the better receiver. But I think if this team is looking at a 4th tight end and they want that blocking ability as well, I think Armani Rogers really has an opportunity to steal that spot. I don't have a prediction there. I know that's kind of boring. And believe me, if I could just make one up, I would. But the honest truth is, and that's why I try to be with you guys all the time, is honest and true, I don't know. I don't know who's going to win it. But I think, honestly, the fact that I don't know who's going to take that 4th spot, if there is indeed a 4th active tight end, is more of a negative towards or more of a takeaway from Cole Turner. And it just kind of shows where we are. And again, I like Cole Turner a lot. I have a lot of hope for the kid, but blocking has just been his problem. And, we need to see if that got better this offseason. Hopefully it did. Hopefully he'll come into training camp and really kind of show marked improvement there. Doesn't have to be the best blocker in the NFL, right? Just show a marked improvement there. And if he does, then I think my tune will change there. But of course, we've got pre-training camp expectation episodes coming up as well towards the end here of the dead periods. We get into the later periods of July. Coming up tomorrow, we will continue these conversations here on Locked On Commanders, so make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, throw them down in the YouTube comment section or text me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. Don't forget, make sure you also check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every dayers. Thank you for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.